Well, welcome everyone to our second meal with a message. Good you could join us. And my name's Dave, if you don't already know, but I'm going to be introducing David shortly. So it's a double act of Dave and David this evening. So welcome. The order for the evening is that David's going to speak first. You might have thought we're eating first, but the way it's going to happen is this way. So David will speak first, and then you can listen to that. And if there's any questions after that, you're happy to take some questions. And then whenever we're ready to eat at some suitable point after that, we'll move to our meal. So, and then obviously David will still be here to chat to and ask questions of. So welcome to David. You're a physics teacher, for those that weren't here this morning. A physics teacher in York, written a couple of books which are at the back of the church there, which are available. And we're glad to have you with us. And your title for tonight, I'll let you introduce that, but without any more ado. Okay, so I'll hand over to you without any more ado. Here.
My name's David. When I'm being professional. There we go. My wife wishes she could do that, I think. I've got some slides as well. Here's the first. Here we go. Leap of faith. So, my name is David Hutchings. I'm a science teacher, so I'm used to heckling. Feel free to heckle or interrupt at any point, and I'll put you in detention. If you're very disappointed to find out that I'm speaking first and that you're eating afterwards, let me reassure you, I will turn a blind eye if, while I'm speaking, people wander over to the table, get some crisps, and wander back to their table again, right? That is absolutely fine, okay? It won't bother me. I'm sure it won't bother anybody else either. This is supposed to be relaxed. We are supposed to be like family, aren't we? I was saying to my daughters, Bethany and Chloe, isn't it exciting that we can jump in the car and drive for 2 hours and arrive somewhere and find a family? And you've got brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and cousins you hadn't met yet until today. And of course, that's true, isn't it? And it's true all over the world. You can go anywhere in the world and find family. And that's one of the joys of having a Father in heaven, so that we have brothers and sisters everywhere else. And I was asked to come and speak today on the topic, a leap of faith. Brackets, question mark, close brackets, for people who are uncomfortable with a hanging bracket left. I did that once in my class. I'd bracketed something, hadn't put the second bracket on, and I was teaching, and I noticed there were about 4 or 5 people who couldn't cope. They were sort of sitting like this, and eventually one of them cracked and went, "You need to put the other bracket!" So don't worry, I've put them both on there. And if you do see anything else in the slides that's grammatically incorrect, you feel free. You can chip in and say, well, that should be "an" instead of "a," or something like that. I was asked, as part of it, to give my testimony, my story. So I've raided the photo albums, and you can see some photos from the last. I'm 40 years old, so photos from over the last 40 years will appear during this talk. Okay, so here we go. Here's the first one. This was a photo of me and my sister and my mum and my dad. And I was born in Oxford in 1981. Ultravox, singing Vienna. They were number 1 at the time. Those of you who can remember that. And I've been told that I was at church on my first Sunday in this world. Okay, and I've been at church pretty much every Sunday since then as well. In other words, I was born into a practicing Christian family, right? And I grew up thinking church was just the normal thing that you did on a Sunday. And I formulated my own worldview when I was a kid, and it was quite a simple one. There's heaven, and there's hell, and in the world there are goodies, and there are baddies. And then when goodies die, they go to heaven, and when baddies die, they go to hell. And the way that you could tell the difference between a goodie and a baddie was that on a Sunday, goodies went to church. And the baddies did terrible things like spending time with their families or going out on day trips. And so that was what I believed. Now, nobody had ever taught me that. I just sort of picked it up. And this is what I thought the world was like. And I was fine with it because I went to church on a Sunday, so I was a goodie, which meant when I died, I was going to go to heaven. And everything was all right with the world when I was about 8. Okay? The problem is that I was quite a naughty little boy, and I used to get in quite a lot of trouble. And in particular, I used to lose my temper and hit people, or kick people, or push people over, and that kind of thing. And one day, I got a very severe telling off, which was also caught on camera, as you can see, by the headmaster at my primary school. And it was a proper telling off. And I can remember thinking, whilst he was telling me off, this guy doesn't get it. He's telling me off. He shouldn't be telling me off because I'm a goodie. Okay? That's what I thought. Genuinely, that's what I thought. And I remember going home and thinking, I'm going to tell my mum about this. The head teacher told me off, but I'm a goodie. So I did. I told my mum. And she said, well, you see, the problem is you're actually quite naughty. That's what she said, or something along those lines. And something happened in my head and in my heart. And I suddenly realized, oh, what if I'm actually a baddie? That was like the moment. And in that moment, my world shattered. Because if I was a baddie, then when I died, I was going to go to hell. That's a big thing to think for a little kid. And it was frightening. Okay? And I started to cry. And I said to my mum, what can I do? What can I do? And she said, well, you need to do 2 things. You go to Jesus and you say sorry. Okay? Sorry for the things that you do that are wrong. And then you say, the second thing is that you say to him, I want you in charge of my life now. I don't want to be in charge anymore. Okay? And so I did. I did those 2 things. I went to Jesus and I said, I'm sorry. And I knew in my heart I really was sorry. And I said to him, I need you to come and help me. I need you to be in charge of my life. And I meant it. And so that's when I became a Christian. The Bible uses the language of being, this is a photo of my actual conversion moment. The Bible uses the language of being born again. It was like I was born again, a new start. I'd already been born once, but now I was being born again into a new life. A life that I was going to live without me in charge, but with Jesus in charge. And that has been my life. My life has been one where the intention is that Jesus is in charge. Do I sometimes try and take control back myself and do it my own way? Yes. Does that work? No. What happens next? I say sorry again, and I ask Jesus to help me again. But the gaps between those things happening get bigger because you learn that it's better with Jesus than without Jesus. Skip forwards a few years. Here's one from our wedding album. I met my wife. Obviously, when I met her, she wasn't my wife. I met her at university. I did that totally terrible thing that some guys do. I told her I was going to marry her on our first date. I think about it now and I cringe. I can't believe I was that guy. Oh. But I was right. So we got married in 2006. And we got married in Chester at Hoole Hall Hotel, which is now the Doubletree Hilton, which doesn't sound quite so nice, does it? But the Hoole Hall Hotel, that's where we got married in 2006. And we went on our honeymoon to Egypt. We got married in December, so we spent Christmas in Egypt. We were sunbathing by the pool, and out came Santa in full Santa gear with a snow machine. That was a very surreal experience. And I was working as a teacher, teaching physics up near York at Pocklington School. And then there's a photo of my classroom. And then also in the church, I began to preach. So here's some photos of me preaching. So this was my life. My life fitted quite nicely into the kind of box of Christian cliches, right? And it all seemed to be going quite well. But then one day, I listened to a podcast about the Bible. It was being given by a Christian, and he was explaining how we should interpret the Bible. These are ways that when you read the Bible, this is how to understand what it means. And the things that he said really disturbed me. He was taking an approach that was, saying, well, the Bible's a human document, and what we've got to do is pick out the godly stuff from it, and this kind of thing. And the effect that it had on me was it totally undermined my faith. Okay? It was like somebody had walked up and I was standing on a rug and they'd grabbed the rug and they just pulled it like that. And boom, down I went. And for the second time in my life, I started to struggle because I started to hear and read things like this. This chap's called Richard Dawkins, and he wrote a book called The God Delusion. Here's one of his quotes. Faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and to evaluate evidence. Faith is belief in spite of, perhaps even because of, the lack of evidence. So I was reading this sort of stuff and listening to this sort of stuff, and it was starting to pull my Christianity to pieces. Okay? Or Peter Hitchens read one of his books. Faith is the surrender of the mind. This is Christopher Hitchens. Faith is a surrender of the mind. It's the surrender of reason. It's the surrender of the only thing that makes us different from other mammals. Okay? Again, this is an attack, isn't it? If you want to have faith, you have to turn your brain off to have faith. And if you turn your brain on, you'll find you don't have faith anymore because it will all seem very silly to you. And so my world, once more, was shattered. And I was stuck in this situation, a very strange situation, for about a year and a half, where I no longer believed in God. I was in my mid to late 20s. And I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't tell anyone at church. I just carried on living my life. In fact, I carried on being happily married. I carried on teaching at my job. And I even carried on preaching at church. Because they were habits. That was my life. And I wasn't prepared to change my entire identity. This is what I did. This is who I was. But privately, I didn't believe, and I was in crisis. And living this kind of double life puts a strain on you. Okay? And I encourage you, if you're actually in that situation now, you need to tell somebody. It takes a strain. And eventually, I thought, look, something's got to give here. I'm living a fake life. And so, even though I wasn't really sure at all that there was a God who existed, I began to pray. And then I also thought, I've got to do something. So I started reading books and listening to podcasts and starting almost all over again. So I read about Christianity, I read about other religions, I read about philosophy, I read about history, read about science, listened to these things, had conversations with people in those areas. And bit by bit, over the course of a year or so, God put my faith back together again. And this time it was being built with bricks that included things like evidence, thinking about things, okay, facts and history. It wasn't built purely on what had come to me as a kid, which was like a conviction in my heart, that now my mind was getting more involved as well, okay? And I became more convinced of the truth of Christianity through this process that God took me through than I ever had been before. I was like a kind of rebuilt Christian, like a kind of Christian RoboCop, you know? I'd had a terrible accident and then I'd been gradually put back together again. And so I want to share with you some of the things, and I can only share some because this was a year of research and work. I want to share with you some of the things that I found encouraging along the way, okay? Anyone know who this is a photo of? Anyone surprised they had cameras back then? That comes a bit of a shock. Well, I would expect you to all know because he's a very famous guy. This is St. Peter, guys, come on. He's white beard and a kind of orangey yellow glow around his head. I mean, you would have thought anyone would recognize him, wouldn't you? So this is St. Peter. Now, what does he say about faith? And remember, he's right at the start. He's the first person to preach a Christian sermon in all of history, right? So this is right at the start. What does he say? For we did not follow cleverly devised stories when we told you about the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ in power, but we were eyewitnesses. So how does Christianity start right at the beginning? Does it start with an appeal to the spiritual out there somewhere that says, look, there's just some hidden knowledge, and if you meditate long enough, you'll discover it? Is that how Christianity starts? No. Right from the beginning, Peter says, hey, we saw some stuff and we want to tell you about it. It actually happened. We haven't made up stories. We're telling you eyewitness accounts. Okay, so Christianity starts with evidence. That's really important. It didn't start with a vision that somebody had. Right? It starts with evidence of events in history. Christianity is rooted in the real world. It's a real earthy religion. Okay? It's not up there somewhere. Okay, who recognizes this guy? Someone brave enough to have a guess? Very good, yes. Were you there? So this is Paul. Now, what does he say? He's been telling a guy called Festus. All about Jesus. And Festus' response is he says to Paul, hey, Paul, your great learning is driving you insane. That's what he says to him. Now, isn't that interesting? Does he say to Paul, hey, Paul, you're an idiot and you don't know anything? Doesn't say that, does he? He says, Paul, your great learning is driving you insane. Isn't that interesting? So Paul, who kind of was the first ever Christian missionary, what did they throw at him? You know too much. They didn't say you don't know enough. You know too much. In fact, it's interesting that if you look on a list on Wikipedia, or at least the last time I looked, of who are considered to be the most intelligent human beings who've ever lived, and this is on Wikipedia, St. Paul is listed as one of them, right? Because he was a philosopher, he was a teacher, and he totally changed the world with his writings. Okay? So, now what's his reply? He says, I'm not insane, most excellent Festus, Paul replied. What I'm saying is true and reasonable. Now that's interesting, isn't it? That's an interesting defense. Paul is saying, what I'm telling you makes sense. It's reasonable. That's Paul's defense. If you actually sit down and think about it, it does all add up. It makes sense. What does Paul not say? He doesn't say to Festus, look, you need to go and sit in a cave for 5 years. And after that, some revelation will come to you. Doesn't say that, does he? Christianity is not out there somewhere. What I'm saying is true and reasonable. Okay? Well, this one I put the name on just in case you were struggling. What I hadn't realized until I saw this photo is just how piercing his blue eyes were. I mean, he must have had people following him around all over the place. Now, St. Luke, what do we know about St. Luke? Well, was he a guy who was just along for a ride because he was caught up in the emotion and the excitement of it all, and he didn't really want to have to think? And is faith the great cop-out for him, like Richard Dawkins said? Or is faith the surrender of the mind, like Christopher Hitchens said? Well, what does Luke say at the start of his book? He says this: "Therefore, having carefully investigated everything from the beginning, it seemed good also to me to write an orderly account for you." Luke was a nerd, wasn't he? Go back and read Acts, okay? Those of you who've got your church Bibles with you, open up a section of Acts, and there will be about 10 consecutive sentences that say, at 3:30 in the afternoon, we got the boat to Thessalonica, and then after we were there for a little bit, and interestingly, we went the leeward side of Crete, and you think, what? Why? What are you doing? People are going to read this for 2,000 years. But why does he write like that? Because he's a nerd. He's interested in all the tiny little details, okay? And there have been a few interesting times in history where people have read something that Luke wrote, and they've gone, well, that's wrong. We know that's wrong. Archaeologists haven't found that city or that building. And then what happens? They go and they investigate it again, and they dig it up, and they go, Luke was right. Why? Because look at what he says. Having carefully investigated everything. Do you know what Luke did? He went around and he interviewed people. He interviewed eyewitnesses. He said, I want to write a story about Jesus, but I need to know I've got it right. I'm going to go and find Mark, or I'm going to go and find Matthew, or I'm going to go and find Mary. I'm going to sit with them, and I'm going to hear their stories. Okay? Luke was a doctor. Certainly not some kind of airy-fairy, spiritual, vague mystic, He was interested in on-the-ground facts. And he's right there at the start. Okay, here are some more mugshots. I'm not going to ask you to name all of them, but does anyone think they can name any of them? Michael Faraday, very good. I don't know if the laser pointer... Oh, look, it does work. There's Michael Faraday, okay? What did he invent? Yeah, very good. He basically invented the electric motor. He built the first working electric motor, okay? Any others? Let's see if we can get one more. Come on, guys. Is it Charles Dickens? No, it's not. Which one did you think was Charles Dickens? This one? Okay, yeah, so he was alive at the same time as Charles Dickens, so I'll give you half a point. He is arguably the greatest British scientist of all time. I say British because whenever English people want to credit someone who's Scottish, they say British, right? So, who is he? He's James Clerk Maxwell, right? James Clerk Maxwell. He, interestingly, laid the theoretical groundwork for the laser, which is now pointing at his face. Now these are, if you were to write a list, or if you were to ask scientists, write a top 10 list of the greatest scientists of all time. Most scientists would put most of these people on it. Let's have a look at who they are. Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, Brahe, Boyle, Newton, Leibniz, Pascal, Faraday, and Clerk Maxwell. Now, why do you think I've chosen them? What do you think they've all got in common other than terrible hair? They're all world-changing scientists, so they're people who live the life of the mind. Anything else? They all believed in God. Okay? And not only did they all believe in God, they wrote down that they believed in God, and they wrote at length that they believed in God, and they gave their reasons for believing in God. In fact, nearly all of them were biblical Christians, right? As in they believed the Bible as it came. Newton had a few strange ideas. So there's a bit of an argument. Some people say yes, he was a Christian. And other people say, well, no, he wasn't really a Christian. He believed a lot of Christian ideas, but wasn't really a Christian. And that debate carries on. You know, people still argue it either way. But Copernicus, he was actually ordained in the church. Kepler wrote at great length about how God had guided him as a scientist. And he also said that God wants us to be scientists, because by being scientists, we're investigating God's world, and we're going to learn more about God that way. Okay? Even Galileo, who is often brought out as being the ultimate kind of anti-church guy, he was a Christian. And he wrote at length. He wrote in 1615, he wrote a letter to the Grand Duchess Christina saying why you could trust the Bible and why he trusted it. Okay? So these people are all very bright, very intelligent, very interested in facts and in reason, and they believe the Bible and they follow Jesus. Okay. Well, these guys are all in the past, right? So let's find some people in the present, shall we? I can't do any in the future, sorry. So we'll do present. Anyone know who this is? This is Francis Collins. So now do you know the name? Do you know who he is? No. Well, Francis Collins is the most important scientist in America. He is he's the head of the Institutes of Health, the National Institutes of Health in America, and he's a Christian. He was in charge of the program that sequenced the human genome, which is perhaps the greatest scientific achievement of the last 50 or 60 years at least, and he was in charge of that program. What does he say about being a Christian? He says, I actually do not believe that there are any collisions between what I believe as a Christian and what I know and have learned about as a scientist. Okay? Doesn't look like faith is a great cop-out for him, does it? Or that he has surrendered his mind. He's leading thousands of scientists. Barack Obama appointed him as this senior scientist. And yet, there he is. He's a Christian. He hasn't turned his brain off. Okay? Well, you might know the person on the right here. Who's the person on the right? It's not God. He did play God in a film. I haven't got any photos of God. Do you know who that is? Morgan Freeman. Okay. Now, the guy on the left, you might not know who he is right now, but I'm very much hoping that you'll know who he is in a few years' time. He's just finished some work that I would love to see win a Nobel Prize. Okay? He's a theoretical physicist at Oxford, and a friend of mine called Ard Louis. And he wrote, amongst other things, written a lot and spoken a lot on this. This is a documentary where he's explaining to Morgan Freeman how a scientist can think about God. I know Morgan Freeman is laughing, but that's not because the points that were being made were ridiculous. He actually quite liked them. You can watch the episode yourself, it's online. And what does Ard Louis say? He says it's the sum total of all of those arguments. What arguments? Well, you'll have to read the paper. It's about 10 pages, okay? It's the sum total of all of those arguments that convinces me of the veracity of biblical miracles. Okay? So he's a Christian, he's a theoretical physicist at Oxford University. I'm hoping he's going to win a Nobel Prize. I'm probably hoping it's slightly more than him, because he's a very humble chap. And there he is. He's convinced by biblical miracles. But why is he convinced? Why is he convinced? Is he convinced because he went away and just clenched his fists and said, I believe, I believe, I believe? No, look what he says. It's the sum total of these arguments that convinces me. He's using his mind. This is Henry Schaefer III. We've had a biologist, we've had a physicist, so I thought we'd better have a chemist. And he is a chemist. There's some controversy around him because it's claimed that he's been nominated for the Nobel Prize 5 times during his career, but it's supposed to be secret who's nominated for a Nobel Prize. So either somebody's leaked it, or somebody's exaggerating, or something strange is going on. But he's an incredibly famous and influential chemist who's been cited left, right, and centre for about the last 30 or 40 years. What does he say? The significance and joy in my science comes in those occasional moments of discovering something new and saying to myself, so that's how God did it. Is he turning his brain off? No, he's using his brain. All right, well, they're all scientists. Here is a historian and theologian, David Bentley Hart, at Harvard University. He writes long, complicated texts. So I've picked a slightly shorter one here. The reason that the very concept of God has become at once so impoverished, so thoroughly mythical, and ultimately so incredible for so many modern persons, short version is, the reason most people think it's silly to believe in God is not because of all the interesting things we've learned. It's not because we've made more progress. It's actually over the past few centuries, but because of all the vital things we've forgotten. Okay? He's saying the problem with the modern movement away from God is that that movement involves forgetting everything that people have learned for the last 3,000 years and written down. You have to actively forget it. You have to reject it and say, we're not going to listen to anybody before our generation. Okay? Clive Staples Lewis, C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe, and those books. What does he say? I gave up Christianity at about 14. I came back to it when getting on for 30, not an emotional conversion, almost purely philosophical. How did he become a Christian? By sitting and thinking about it. He became a Christian on a bus going up Headington Hill, and I used to live at the top of Headington Hill. So that was quite a nice thing to think about every time I went up that hill. He even says, I didn't want to. I didn't even want to become a Christian. I'm not in the least a religious type. I want to be left alone, to feel like I'm my own master. But since the facts seem to be just the opposite, I had to give in. Why did he become a Christian? Because of the overwhelming evidence for its truth. Okay? Alvin Plantinga, philosopher. Faith is not to be contrasted with knowledge. Faith is knowledge. It's knowledge of a certain special kind. Okay? He's saying, look, if you believe in Jesus and you know in your heart that Jesus is real, that is knowledge. That really is knowledge. It's just a different type of knowledge. Okay? Pascal said something similar, and he phrased it beautifully because he was a Frenchman. He said, the heart has its reasons that only the heart understands. The heart has its reasons that only the heart understands. Aren't there times when you just know something? And you really do know it. But you know it here somehow. Okay? Quentin Smith, he's an atheist philosopher, makes the most extraordinary admission in one of his writings. Look what he says. Now, this is long, so we're going to have to try and make a little bit of sense of it, but it says here, if each naturalist. Now, a naturalist is someone who doesn't believe in God. They believe that the natural world is all there is, there's nothing else. Okay? So, if each naturalist who does not specialize in the philosophy of religion, i.e. over 99% of naturalists, so he's saying 99% of people who don't believe there's a God have never actually thought about it. That's what he's saying. Okay? So, if each naturalist who does not specialize in the philosophy of religion, i.e. over 99% of naturalists, were locked in a room with theists, those are people who do believe in God, who do specialize in the philosophy of religion, so theists who've actually thought about God, and if the ensuing debates were refereed by a naturalist, so you've even allowed the referee to be someone who doesn't believe in God, okay? So the ensuing debates were refereed by a naturalist. I think the laser pointer's gone. There we go. Who had a specialisation in the philosophy of religion. The naturalist referee could at most hope the outcome would be that no definite conclusion could be drawn regarding the rationality of faith. Although I expect the most probable outcome is that the naturalist, wanting to be a fair and objective referee, would have to conclude that the theists definitely had the upper hand in every single argument or debate. So here is a professional philosopher who himself doesn't believe in God, actually admitting in writing that the arguments in favour of God are stronger arguments than the arguments against God. Right? It's quite telling, isn't it? Thomas Nagel, again, this is just breathtaking honesty. He doesn't believe in God, but look what he says. I want atheism to be true, and I'm made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope that I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope there's no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. Isn't that interesting? He's saying some of the smartest people I know say there's a God, and I find that unsettling because I don't want there to be a God. Isn't that honest? In fact, if anything, I think that's the kind of attitude that means he might end up a Christian because he's just being honest. Okay. So here we go. We're at the end, really. The Bible says this, I know whom I have believed. Okay? Being a Christian does not require a leap of blind faith. It is backed up by centuries of history, philosophy, science. Okay? If you haven't done the hard work, fine. I'm telling you, somebody else has. People have thought about this deeply for a long time. The evidence is on your side. Okay? Our faith, Christianity, is based on evidence. It's true. And here's the challenge that I want to leave you with. You should know probably just a few basic arguments. Okay? So that when the Festuses in your life say, oh, you're insane, you can actually give some sort of answer. Even if it's a short and a simple one. Okay? That's what I'm saying. Now, there are a whole load of books over there that will help you to do that. I've seen them. Okay? And we are told in the Bible, always be ready to give an answer if you're challenged on your faith. Okay? I'm not saying you all have to become experts in quantum mechanics. You don't. But you should know a few quick, simple answers that you can give about the evidence for Christianity, right? And so that would be a challenge that I think that you as a church, you seem to be in the mood for it, and you've put together these events. So keep doing them. Keep building up more and more of these arguments into your weaponry, right? So that you've got quick answers to be able to give. I'll give you one or two right now. If someone says, well, Christianity has always held back science, okay? Then what you can, is a quick answer. You can say, well, actually, the time in history that's referred to as the scientific revolution in the 1600s was led by Christians who based their beliefs about what science should look like on the Bible. And so the science that you're talking about is actually Christian science. Okay? There's just a quick one, right? Are you talking about the science that was put together by Christians? Is that the science you mean? The one that's being done now. So building those up will help. I do need to plug my books because of the price of petrol, and I had to drive down here. So there are some quick wins, I think, for you in some of these books, and I'll present them in order of nerdiness. Okay? So least nerdy is Let There Be Science. Okay? If you've got no background in science at all, no background in theology at all, you can still read this book. It's a book of stories about how to think about God and science. And my co-author, Tom McLeish, Fellow of the Royal Society, one of the top scientists anywhere in the world. He's a Christian, and it's based on, the content of this book is based on his work. Okay. Then, somewhere in the middle, Of Popes and Unicorns. Good title, huh? This is about two men in the 1800s who wrote books that told everybody that you had to pick a side between God and science. And they told a whole load of stories that aren't true. They said, oh, the church told Columbus that he would sail off the edge of the earth. Not true, never happened. Okay? They said, oh, Galileo was thrown in jail. Not true, never happened. They said, oh, the church told everybody that the earth was flat throughout history. Not true, never happened. Okay? They said, oh, the church banned dissection. Not true, never happened. They said, the church banned anesthetic. Not true, never happened. So this is a story of those two guys and the books they wrote and how those books took over the world. And then looking at their books and saying, what's the truth? So it's like a debunking book. But it's hardback, and it's by Oxford University Press, and they've massively overpriced it, so I'm just warning you. It's very good, but it's 20 quid, and that's a lot of money for a book. This one, by contrast, is just a tenner. And then, if you want to go full nerd, there's God, Stephen Hawking, and the universe. On the back it says, if you wanted to understand Stephen Hawking but couldn't face the maths, this is the book for you. There's not a single equation in it, but it does explain what Stephen Hawking did. Why is he so famous? And the person who gave that quote is Dr. Althea Wilkinson, who works at Jodrell Bank, not far from here. Okay. If you want to get one of these, or more than one of these, that's a tenner as well, find me before I go home. My wife would be very happy if I come back having sold at least some books. You know, that's how these things work, right? But I'm also happy to take a few questions if you want to do that now. If you'd rather eat and I'll just mill around, we can do that instead. I don't know what your preference is. You can see the clock.
Anyone got any questions now? Anyone got anything particular you'd like to ask? I think it's very helpful. I think what you touched on there, how the atheist would describe faith. Our faith is more like a blind faith, a leap in the dark, a leap believing something despite the evidence, whereas I think very clearly came through that faith is believing because of the evidence, and there's evidence and it's reasonable to believe. And I think it's very helpful just to clarify that, where someone might be saying, well, you have faith, and what they think or what they impose upon us is what we believe is being faith. But has anyone got any particular questions that you'd like to ask David?
There's one at that there.
Pete?
This is a quick answer to someone who says, how can you possibly believe the miracles of Jesus when they contradict science?
Yeah, there is a quick answer actually, which is that you can only believe in miracles if you believe in science. Because the definition of a miracle is that the normal laws of science have been broken. Right? So if you don't believe that there are normal laws of science, and you don't believe in the world of science, there's no such thing as a miracle, because there are no laws to be broken. Right? And in fact, if you didn't believe in science, you would not be surprised by anything ever. Right? But what's the function of a miracle? The Bible doesn't actually call them miracles. What's the Bible call them? Signs. The Bible calls them signs. They're signs. That's a whole point, is that something seriously weird has just happened. And then you go, oh, why did that happen? And it's like a sign. It points towards Jesus, right? Only someone who believes in the regularity of science can believe in a miracle. Does that make sense?
Go on, Joe.
How have your colleagues taken to the faith that you're a Christian? Are they okay with you being a Christian when you do science?
Yeah, they are. I do talk to them about it. I do think they think I'm a bit of an oddball, but I am also an Arsenal fan, so they've got other grounds for thinking that too. I've chatted to them about it, but But actually, I think for physicists, there are a lot of physicists who believe in God. A lot. It's not actually that uncommon in physics. 70% of all of the Nobel Prize winners in the sciences, 70% are Christians. So it isn't as unusual if you're in the sciences to come across someone who's a Christian. I think it's people outside the sciences who think, oh, none of those guys are Christians. But when you're in there, you go and look up a list of Christian scientists, you're going to find, it's going to blow your mind how many there are. Okay?
Anyone else?
They're hungry.
I think they are. They've got that look about them.
Yeah. Yeah. Shall I pray quickly?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Father God, thank you for making this world. Thank you for making it in a way that there are rules and that the rules make life predictable so that we know what's going to happen, that water always boils at the same temperature, that gravity always pulls things down towards the center of the earth. Thank you that we don't live in a chaotic world with no rules where every time we do something different is going to happen. So we thank you for science, and we thank you for giving us the brains to figure out how those rules work. And we thank you that that means that people can cook food without any surprises. And so we thank you for this food that we're going to have now. Amen.
Are we being served, or do you know?